I was 52 years old, standing in an empty apartment with 3 suitcases and a divorce decree that gave me almost nothing after 3 decades of marriage. My ex-husband was celebrating his freedom with a woman half my age. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that his father had been watching. And William Ashford didn't just give me a second chance. He gave me a choice that would change everything. Before I tell you how a woman who lost everything gained a life beyond her wildest dreams, let me know where you're listening from in the comments. And if you've ever felt invisible after giving your best years to someone who didn't deserve them, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Because this story is for you. Grab a cup of coffee as we ride together into this story. My name is Natalie, and for 30 years I believed I was building something permanent. I met Douglas Ashford when I was 22, fresh out of college with a teaching degree and dreams that felt too big for my small-town upbringing. He was 25, charming and ambitious, working at his father's investment firm in Boston. He had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room, like your words mattered, like your presence made his world brighter. We got married 6 months later. His father, William, attended the wedding. He was different from Douglas, quieter, more observant. While Douglas worked the room with handshakes and laughter, William sat at our table and asked me about my teaching plans. He listened, really listened, in a way that felt rare even then. "You have good instincts," he told me that night. "Don't lose them." I didn't understand what he meant. Not then. The first 10 years were the kind you see in photographs. Dinners with friends, weekend trips, late-night conversations about the future. Douglas climbed the corporate ladder. I taught 4th grade at a public school in Cambridge, coming home with paint on my hands and stories about my students that Douglas half listened to while scrolling through emails. "That's nice, Nat," he'd say, not looking up. But I told myself that was normal. That's what marriage looked like when both people were building careers. By year 15 something had shifted. Douglas spent more time at the office, more weekends traveling for business development. I spent more time alone, grading papers at the kitchen table, waiting for him to come home, and when I suggested we take a vacation he'd sigh. "Maybe next quarter," he'd say. "Things are just really tight right now." But things were never not tight. There was always another deal, another client, another reason why our life together could wait. I stopped teaching when we tried for children. We spent 5 years in fertility clinics, thousands of dollars on treatments that never worked. Every negative test felt like another piece of me crumbling. Douglas grew distant during those years, like my inability to give him a child was a personal failure he couldn't forgive. "Maybe it's not meant to be," he said one night, flat and emotionless. I cried alone in the bathroom while he watched television in the other room. By year 25 I barely recognized us. I had quit teaching to support Douglas's career, hosting dinners for clients, managing our home, and playing the role of the perfect corporate wife. I smiled at events. I laughed at jokes I didn't find funny. I made myself small so he could feel big. And William watched. He visited every few months, always kind, always asking about me first before talking business with Douglas. He'd bring me books, ask about my old students, remember details Douglas had forgotten. "You gave up a lot," William said to me once during a quiet moment at a family dinner. "That's what you do for marriage," I replied. He looked at me with something like sadness. "Only if both people are giving." I changed the subject. I didn't want to admit he was right. Then came the morning that split my life into before and after. I was in the kitchen making coffee when Douglas walked in, showered and dressed for work, holding a folder. He set it on the counter between us with the casual indifference of someone dropping off dry cleaning. "I need you to sign these," he said. I opened the folder. "Divorce papers." The words blurred. My hands started shaking. I looked up at him, searching his face for some sign this was a mistake or a joke, something other than what it clearly was. "Douglas, what?" "I've been seeing someone," he said, cutting me off. "Her name is Brooke. She's 31. We've been together for 8 months. 8 months. I felt my stomach drop, that terrible weightless feeling of freefall. "Why didn't you?" "Because I needed time to figure out what I wanted," he said, pouring himself coffee like we were discussing the weather. "And now I know. I want a divorce." "But we can talk about this," I said, my voice breaking. "We can go to counseling, we can—" "I don't want to fix this, Natalie. I want out." The cruelty of it hit me like cold water. 30 years of loyalty, sacrifice, of making myself smaller so he could grow. And he was ending it over morning coffee. What about the house? I whispered. It's in my name. You'll need to move out. The savings. Most of it's tied up in investments under my accounts. You'll get what the lawyer says is fair. Fair. The word tasted bitter. I gave you 30 years, I said, my voice shaking with something between rage and heartbreak. Douglas looked at me, then really looked at me, and I saw it clearly. He felt nothing. No guilt, no sadness, no recognition of what we'd built together. I was just an obstacle he was removing from his path forward. You'll be fine, Nat. You're resilient. Then he left for work. I stood in that kitchen for 20 minutes, staring at the divorce papers, my hands still trembling. The apartment felt too quiet and cold, like all the warmth had been drained out the moment he spoke those words. That night I called William. William Ashford arrived at my door 2 days later. He didn't call first. He simply knocked, and when I opened the door he stood there in his coat, silver hair combed back, eyes sharp with something I couldn't name yet. May I come in? He asked gently. I stepped aside. I'd been crying on and off for 48 hours. My face was swollen, my hair unwashed. I didn't care. William walked into the living room and sat across from me, hands folded and waiting. He told you, I said. It wasn't a question. He did. And he told me in a way that made it very clear he believes this is entirely reasonable. I laughed bitterly. Of course he does. William's jaw tightened. Natalie, I need you to understand something. My son is making a mistake. But more than that, he's making a choice that reveals exactly who he's become. And I don't like what I see. I wiped my eyes. It doesn't matter what you like, William. He's your son. And I'm just. You're the woman who gave him 30 years. William interrupted, his voice firm. You're the woman who sacrificed her career, her dreams, and her identity to support him. You're the woman who deserves far better than this. The kindness in his voice broke something in me. I started crying again, deep sobs I couldn't control. William didn't look away. He didn't tell me to stop. He just waited, patient and steady, until I could breathe again. What does the divorce settlement look like? He asked finally. I handed him the papers Douglas's lawyer had sent. William read them slowly, his expression darkening with every page. This is insulting, he said quietly. That's all I'm going to get. Not if I have anything to say about it. I looked at him confused. William, you can't. I can. And I will. He set the papers down. But first I need to know something. What do you want, Natalie? Not what Douglas wants. Not what his lawyer says is fair. What do you want? Nobody had asked me that in 30 years. I opened my mouth, then closed it. I didn't know how to answer. William leaned forward. Do you want to fight him? I don't have the money to fight him. You do now. The words hung in the air between us. I'm hiring you a lawyer, William continued. The best divorce attorney in Massachusetts. Someone who won't let Douglas and his legal team bully you into accepting scraps. William, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. His voice softened. Natalie, you gave my son everything. The least I can do is make sure you leave this marriage with your dignity intact. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. 3 weeks later, I sat across from Douglas and his lawyer in a conference room that smelled like leather and old wood. My attorney, a sharp woman named Cynthia Hartford, sat beside me with a file 2 inches thick. Douglas looked annoyed that I'd hired representation. Like I was supposed to just sign his papers and disappear quietly. Let's keep this civil, his lawyer began. Cynthia smiled. Civility goes both ways, counselor. Your client is attempting to leave Ms. Natalie with minimal assets after a 30-year marriage in which she sacrificed her career to support him. That ends today. For the next 2 hours, Cynthia systematically dismantled every attempt Douglas made to minimize my contributions. She had documentation. Every dinner I'd hosted for his clients, every event I'd attended, every year I'd worked without salary to build our life together. Your client wants to claim the house is solely his, Cynthia said. But Ms. Natalie can prove she paid for renovations, furnishings, and maintenance from her personal inheritance. That makes her a financial contributor to the property. Douglas's face went red. By the end of the meeting, the settlement had changed dramatically. I would receive half the house value, a portion of his retirement accounts, and a monthly payment for 3 years while I rebuilt my life. It wasn't everything, but it was something. Douglas left that conference room without looking at me once. But the hardest part wasn't the legal battle. It was loneliness. I moved into a small apartment in Cambridge, 3 rooms that felt empty no matter how much furniture I bought. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, forgetting for a moment that I was alone, reaching for someone who wasn't there anymore. My friends, our friends, mostly sided with Douglas. They stopped inviting me to dinners. They stopped calling. Slowly and quietly, I disappeared from the life I'd built. Except for William. He called every week. Sometimes just to check in. Sometimes he invites me to lunch. He never asked about Douglas. He asked about me, what I was reading, what I was planning, how I was really doing. "You don't have to do this," I told him once over coffee at a cafe near my apartment. "Do what?" "Check on me. I'm not your responsibility." William set down his cup. "Natalie, you were family for 30 years. That doesn't end because my son is a fool." His words cracked something open in my chest. "I don't know who I am anymore," I admitted. "I spent so long being his wife that I forgot how to just be me." William looked at me with those steady, thoughtful eyes. "Then maybe it's time you figured that out." 6 months after the divorce was finalized, William invited me to his estate in Cape Cod. "Just for the weekend," he said over the phone. "The house is too quiet and I think we could both use the company." I almost said no. Being around the Ashford name, even William, felt like reopening a wound. But something in his voice, something lonely and genuine, made me agree. The estate was breathtaking. White columns, sprawling gardens, the ocean visible from every window. I'd been there a handful of times during my marriage, always for formal events where I played the role of Douglas's wife. This time I arrived as myself. William greeted me at the door, casual in a sweater and slacks, smiling in a way that made the house feel warm instead of grand. "Welcome," he said simply. That weekend we fell into an easy rhythm. We walked along the beach in the mornings talking about everything except Douglas. We cooked dinner together. William was surprisingly good in the kitchen. We sat by the fireplace at night, reading in comfortable silence. It was the first time in years I felt like I could breathe. On the last evening we sat on the porch watching the sun set over the water. The sky was streaked with orange and pink, the air cool and salt-touched. "I need to tell you something," William said quietly. I turned to look at him. "I've been thinking about this for months," he continued. "And I've tried to talk myself out of it 100 times because of how it might look, what people might say. But I'm 73 years old, Natalie. I don't have time to waste on what people think." My heart started beating faster. "I care about you," William said, meeting my eyes. "Not as my son's ex-wife. Not out of pity or obligation. I care about you as a woman I've admired for 30 years. A woman who deserves to be seen, valued, and loved the way you should have been all along." I couldn't speak. The words sat between us, enormous and terrifying and impossibly tender. "I'm not asking you for an answer," William continued. "I'm just asking you to consider the possibility that your story doesn't end with my son. Maybe, if you're willing, it could begin with me." Tears slipped down my cheeks. Not from sadness but from something else entirely. "William, I stopped trying to find words that felt true. "I don't know if I'm ready." "Then don't be ready," he said gently. "Just be open. That's all I'm asking." I looked at this man, 20 years older than me, silver-haired and steady, who had shown me more kindness in 6 months than his son had in 30 years. And I realized something stunning. I was already falling for him. "Okay," I whispered. William smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise. We spent the next 3 months building something I'd never experienced before. A relationship based on equality, respect, and genuine affection. William didn't want me to be smaller. He wanted me to be exactly who I was. He encouraged me to go back to school, to finish the master's degree in education I'd abandoned when I married Douglas. He listened when I talked about my students, my dreams of opening a literacy program for underprivileged kids. "Do it," he said. "I'll help fund it if you need support." "William, I can't." "Yes, you can. And you will." He took my hand. "Natalie, I spent 40 years building wealth. Let me spend the rest of my life watching you build something that matters." By the time spring arrived, I had enrolled in graduate classes and drafted a proposal for the Literacy Center. I felt alive in a way I hadn't since I was 22. And then Douglas found out. He called me one night, voice tight with fury. "Are you seriously dating my father?" I took a breath. "Yes." Do you have any idea how this looks? How humiliating is this for me? Something inside me hardened. Douglas, you humiliated me. You left me after 30 years for a woman half your age. You tried to leave me with nothing. Your father treated me with more respect in 6 months than you did in 3 decades. So no, I don't care how this looks for you. There was silence on the other end. You're doing this to hurt me, he said finally. I laughed, bitter and sharp. Not everything is about you, Douglas. This is about me finally choosing someone who sees my worth. I hung up. 2 weeks later, William proposed. We didn't have a big wedding. Neither of us wanted that. Instead, on a quiet Saturday morning in June, William and I stood in the garden of his Cape Cod estate with a handful of close friends and a judge who'd known William for 40 years. I wore a simple white dress. William wore a suit the color of sea glass. When the judge pronounced us married, William kissed me softly, and I felt something click into place, a sense of rightness I'd never experienced before. We didn't tell Douglas in advance. He found out the way everyone else did, through a tasteful announcement in the Boston Globe Society pages. By noon, my phone was flooded with messages. Some were congratulatory. Most were shocked. A few were vicious. Douglas called 37 times. I didn't answer. Finally, he showed up at the estate. William and I were having breakfast on the terrace when we heard the shouting at the front gate. Security called the house and William sighed. Let him in, he said calmly. Douglas stormed through the garden like a man possessed, Brooke trailing nervously behind him. He stopped when he saw us sitting there, coffee cups in hand, the morning sun gentle and warm. What the hell is this? Douglas demanded, his face red. William set down his cup. Good morning, Douglas. Don't good morning me. You married my ex-wife? My father married my ex-wife. I married a remarkable woman, William corrected. The fact that you were too foolish to appreciate her isn't my problem. Douglas turned to me, eyes wild. You did this to get back at me. I met his gaze steadily. Douglas, I did this because I fell in love with a man who treats me like I matter. That has nothing to do with you. You're half his age. I'm 53. Your girlfriend is 31. Would you like to do the math on who has less room to talk? Brooke shifted uncomfortably. Douglas's hands clenched into fists. This is sick. This is over, William interrupted, his voice quiet but absolute. Natalie is my wife now. You will treat her with respect or you will not be welcome in this house. Do you understand me? Douglas stared at his father, something crumbling in his expression. You're choosing her over me? No, William said softly. I'm choosing decency over cruelty. I'm choosing a woman who gave you everything over the son who took it for granted. If that feels like a choice against you, perhaps you should ask yourself why. For a moment, Douglas looked like he might cry. Then his face hardened. Fine, he spat. Enjoy your pathetic little revenge fantasy. He turned and left, Brooke scrambling to keep up. William reached for my hand under the table and squeezed gently. Are you okay? I asked him. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, he said. That was 3 years ago. Today I'm 55 years old and I run the Ashford Literacy Center in Boston, a fully funded program that serves over 200 kids every year. I teach again the way I always wanted to, but now with resources I never dreamed of. William and I spend our mornings walking the beach, our evenings reading by the fire. We travel to places I'd only seen in magazines. We laugh more than I ever did in my first marriage. He treats me like an equal, a partner, someone whose voice matters as much as his. Douglas remarried Brooke last year. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they're already struggling. He wants children. He's hesitant. The same patterns repeat. I don't feel vindicated by that. I just feel sad for who he could have been if he'd learned to value what he had. But William taught me something important. The best revenge isn't destruction. It's building a life so beautiful that the people who hurt you become irrelevant. I didn't set out to hurt Douglas by marrying his father. I set out to find myself again. And in doing that I found something I'd never had before. Real love. Not the desperate, people-pleasing love of my 20s. Not the exhausted, invisible love of my 40s. But the steady, joyful, deeply respectful love of two people who chose each other with clear eyes and open hearts. Sometimes I think about that morning in the kitchen when Douglas handed me divorce papers. How destroyed I felt. And then I look at my life now, full, purposeful, loved, and I realize something. He didn't end my story. He just closed the chapter where I was undervalued. The rest? That was mine to write. If you've ever felt like your story was over, like you gave everything to the wrong person, I hope this reminds you that endings can be beginnings. That being chosen by the right person changes everything. Let me know in the comments if this story resonated with you. And if you believe that real love is worth waiting for no matter how long it takes, hit that subscribe button. Because everyone deserves a second chapter. Especially you. Thank you for listening.